I did that while still doing community advocacy stuff, running around with my kids, because I wanted my kids, like I had the boys growing up, and I wanted them to know that we could stand for change. We could do this if we get enough people behind us, and this is what's right. This is what we need, like just a little bit of change. And I said that to someone yesterday. If I speak to everybody in this room and at least one person walk away with what I said and think that this is possible, I'm happy, right? So I went back to school. I did social service worker. I went back to the stop, worked there for a few years. And so as a victim of abuse, one of the things that I did, taken back from that whole conversation in the kitchen and why did they put us there and give us that money in a space that was not safe and not knowing what to do, a friend of mine and we started a violence against women's group, and we basically just started meeting in one of the women's basement, and we went up to a living room, and kind of now we have our own space. And so then I went to my housing coordinator and I said, you know what, you guys are just putting women in housing with no supports, and this isn't right. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna apply for funding and I'm gonna do something about it. And then I found another organization and I said, I wanna do this. And they said, okay, this is how you do it. So it goes back to being supportive and having that tool in your organization that could support, or even if you don't know it, you could tell someone, oh, I know this other person in another, and things like this is amazing where people could network and get support from each other and know what's going on in different organizations. So I do a lot of little things, and I have a lot of passion for.
You're a nurse.
Yeah, and now I'm a nurse.
Went back to
And so I just think, so in Lawrence Heights, where I'm from, we started this thing called Breaking Barriers for Food. So it's a program that I just came up with. I came up with the name. I figured out how to source funding from Status from Women. And so part of the workshop Nick was talking about was teaching us how to do these kind of things, teaching us how to find money in places and write. Like, I didn't know what a proposal was. I didn't know what a grant was. There's no such thing where I came from, right? So I used that skill to help me create that group. And now we met for 10 weeks. I did it 2 years in a row. And we just cooked and talked crap and learned how to cook chickpeas, because in the islands we don't have chickpeas. And like how to make food bank food, like how to take out the sodium, how to stretch your meals, how to talk about, and a lot of the issues was, so I never do anything and say this is what we do, and I always go in and say, okay, this is gonna be a group on women who have been victims of violence, and it was only for women coming out of shelters, because I think that's where the gap was. And funny now how a lot of organizations have that same program, which I say, that's my idea, you stole my idea, kind of thing. And a lot of it was like, they were newcomers to Canada, the school system was different, CAS, so Children Aid, we have in Canada, and so it was, a lot of things like that was the concerns, like how do we budget on social assistance? And then I kind of learned that for like, having to make ends meet, and like the tricks and what I would do to kind of go for the rest of the month, and kind of taught people. So we just came together for a few weeks and cooked food and talk, and at the end of it, I got someone to come in and give us a pedicure, and like, I'm like, oh, we need to look pretty, kind of thing. So yeah, and then I went back to school again and became a nurse. And my goal is to be a street nurse. So that's basically working with homeless people, because that's where my passion is, and I love it for doing like civic engagement things, and the people we meet when we do put food in the budget stuff, when we go out and talk to like the most vulnerable of vulnerable people, and just figuring out. And you know what? It's funny how people say, oh, people that come to the food bank are so angry, they have so much baggage. And that's not really true when you start talking to them, or if they just fed, or if you give them a glass of juice or a glass of milk, and then you have an awesome conversation. And they're so smart. Like, it's crazy the thing you learn from people who are homeless.
Anybody else here old enough to remember "You've Come a Long Way, Baby"? You've come a long way. And Nick, tell us about Food Centers Canada and how you moved from the stop to Food Centers Canada.
Well, sorry, go ahead.
And if you can, you mentioned that you got up early this morning and walked around Portland and had some observations. And
well, I should say just briefly that the stop went from a $200,000 two-staff ephemeral, just falling apart place to a $5.5 million organization with 35 staff and 400 volunteers and a catering company. And the reason I say that is that funders want to be associated with things that are changing people's lives. And when you start to have measurements or indicators that aren't about poundage of food and waste saved, but more like improved health, behavior change around a whole range of things, blood pressure down, friends met, small farmers supported, politicians that you're pushing against. Those things add up, and people want to be connected to something that's about change. And so I'm not going to get into the details of the fundraising back end, but when you're doing advocacy, for example, you're relevant. You're in the conversation. There are lots of people out there who will support that kind of stuff. So I do want to say that there was a massive transformation, and obviously fundraising was a big part of that. But telling a different narrative, one that's hopeful, one that's about building self-worth and change. Just from a pure crass fundraising perspective, I'll just maybe say it that way, people want to be part of that. I think that, I woke up at 4, I'm on East Coast time, and I went for a walk because I couldn't sleep, and about 6:15 I went over the bridge into Portland. Man, I'm really on East Coast. But it was a very pretty intense. I was trying to clear my head, but it was an intense walk because right at the bottom of the bridge there was a breakfast program, and I somehow came at it, and I saw it all illuminated by light and about 60 people waiting in line outside. And it was like, I don't know, so much has been coursing through my brain through this last couple of days. And there was this halo effect of these people who were about to serve those marginalized folks who are hanging out outside. And charity is such a crazy thing to navigate, because if you're the receiver of it, you often feel small and stigmatized and ashamed. If you're the giver of it, which a lot of these people clearly were on the other side of the glass, it's in the Bible, it's love, it's empathy, it's connection. And so that's such a complicated thing to navigate, and I'm trying always in our work to create spaces where you break that down. And I guess we framed it as charity to solidarity, and we've talked a bit about how we've done that at the stop. I then walked about a block or two further, and there must have been 150 or 200 guys waiting to get into another place. And this place was small. I have no idea how they were going to do that. And then I stepped over about 4 or 5 homeless people about a block later, and I think we forget how poor people are. Like, homeless for sure, we know that, but people who are vulnerably housed and struggling, I mean, $5 a day after paying rent in our province. Very little. I think we forget just how poor people are. So that made me think about that. Then I crossed the street, no word of a lie, a guy asked me for $1. And I was kind of walking past him, and he swore at me in the most intense way. And I probably was an asshole. I probably should turn around and at least, said something to him. I had no money. I was just walking. And that he was angry and stressed. You could feel it. And then I walked a bit further, and I went past Clyde Common and Ace Hotel, Coolio places, right? Real cool. But artisanal, local food. And I think of Mark Winnie, we can't build a food system where the rich get organic and local and the poor get diabetes. But they're allies somehow, I'm thinking about that. And then I walked past Target, and Target spent billions of dollars to come to Canada and then just evaporated. They couldn't do it, and they left. Lots of detritus in their path, lots of unemployed people and suppliers up the creek. And that made me think about, closing food banks or a moratorium on food banks, no more food banks, because Target couldn't figure out, Canada didn't understand how to operate there. And I think there are a lot of emergency programs that aren't there for people but for themselves. And so anyway, I'm throwing that out there. It made me think of that. And then I went past the Hilton downtown, and there was a conference on the future of healthcare. And I bet you a buck that they were not, the buck I should have given to the guy, I bet you a buck that they weren't talking about the social determinants of health. Mm-hmm. I bet you that. They were talking about an MRI in a bigger hospital, even though we know that if you're poor, you are sick. That's the biggest single determinant of your health, is how much income you have in your pocket. And then I walked past an Ethiopian taxi driver who probably can't get his credentials here. That's a big issue in Canada, immigrants who can't get their credentials. Then I walked by Chipotle. This is crazy. I was just like, oh my God, what is happening? I walked by Chipotle, and I think the slogan is, someone can help me with this, food, they got a line. What is it? Food that matters, or food with integrity. And I thought, okay, well, the democratization of good food, if that's what it is, I thought they're an ally somehow. And then I finally got to the water, a peace of mind. I saw a Canadian geese about to take off, and that was good. We call them Canadian geese. I don't know what you call them. Canada geese. Okay. But then I decided, to make a turn back to go to the first place I saw. And, I was really impressed that a bunch of the guys were still there, and it looked really nice. Like it was a place that you would want to be in. It still felt a bit antiseptic. Who serves food with gloves?
Everybody.
That's insane. You ever go to a restaurant where someone showed up with gloves on? Say, here you go. Well, I don't go to those kind of restaurants.
No, it's required here.
Okay, well, I couldn't. In Canada, you only see them in, drop-ins. You don't see them in restaurants. So, but there was something okay. I thought that was all right. And then the final thing before I headed over across the bridge was there were about 7 people with shopping carts that should have been full with food, but they were full with their belongings. Everything. Their home was a shopping cart. And it just reminded me about how it's not an issue of food. There's plenty of food out there. Plenty of food. We throw out 40 to 50% of the food we produce. It's about income inequality. It's about housing, affordable child, whatever. You know what the issues are. That's what it's about. And so these things were pummeling through my head. And as organizations that are working on the front lines, most of my work has been to try and build organizations that are allowing people to feel dignified, to feel part of a community, but also push on those public policy levers. And so I left the stop in 2012 to start Community Food Centers Canada with a band of crazy friends. And so we're on that path to try and build stop-like organizations across Canada. We have 8 now, in various ages and stages of development, from Nova Scotia to Alberta and trying to get into Vancouver. And then we work with about 75 other organizations doing webinars and customized training and grants and a national food summit that brings people together. So the idea is to create spaces where Nadias can come in and feel welcomed and get on with their lives, because one of the big pieces of our work is that no one wants to be poor. No one wants to be poor. It's not about a character flaw or a lifestyle choice. That's not why people are poor. And we know that. Food is a basic human right. It's another key motivator of our work. It's not like an ancillary thing. It's a basic human right that our governments don't deliver on. We also feel really strongly that food should never make you feel smaller. Asking for help should never make you feel smaller. And then the final thing is, food is powerful. Food is this incredible thing that if you eat it with others, you create connection and love and joy, and through it you can express your background and your culture If you eat good food, it makes you healthy and gives you energy. If you grow food sustainably without chemicals, it nourishes the planet. And most importantly, if everyone has access to good food, we have really connected and nourishing communities. So that's the mission that we're on, to try and build organizations like that. And I will finish by saying, or I don't know if I can finish, but I'll finish by saying that never let a crisis go to waste. So we are in crisis times. Whether you think about it from a climate change perspective, when you think about it from a health perspective, and when you think about it certainly from an inequality perspective, and guess what? Food courses through all of those three things. And so we have to build organizations that get at those issues in a real tactile, respectful way. And that's what the Community Food Center is all about. I mean, I've left out lots of pieces to it, but so that's what I'm up to.